second quarter expenditure report overview, and then a resolution requesting the administration to assess nighttime and weekend parking. So we're going to get started. So at this time, we're going to ask those that are here to do the presentation on the disparity study report to please come at this time. The Miller 3 Consulting. You can come.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Sorry, Madam Chair. I was going to kick it off with some comments, if you don't mind.
Oh, I don't mind. I didn't realize you were on the line, Chief of Staff. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good evening, members of Council Finance and Economic Development Committee, all council members, and the viewing public. After months of work, Miller 3 Consulting, a nationally recognized public sector consulting firm, is here this evening to present the results of the disparity study. The administration and council strongly supported this effort because we all recognize that improvements are needed to the city's procurement process. The fact that we have a report to inform us is good news. And even better, Miller 3 has provided recommendations to improve the fairness, accessibility, and inclusiveness of our procurement system. The administration is committed to working with council to make this happen. We need to make sure that a wider range of businesses, especially minority and women-owned businesses, have the opportunity to bid for city-issued proposals for goods and services. Now we have a plan to follow. So on behalf of Mayor Purzycki, I extend my thanks to Miller 3 for their very deep dive on this very important matter. It is my pleasure to introduce Dave Miller, Chief Executive Officer of Miller 3 Consulting, who will present the report to City Council. After Mr. Miller's presentation, James Williams from our Economic Development Office will be joined by our city's contracted diversity expert, Tanya Pope, to review some of the recommendations. So again, thank you, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Chief of Staff. So I'm going to invite you to come and sit at these seats, everyone that's going to be speaking, and I'm going to ask that you announce your name before you present. Thank you. Ladies first. I'm just kidding.
Hi, I'm Tanya Pope from the Pope Consulting Group, and I will be reading out the recommendations after Mr. Dave Miller presents the findings of the study.
Thank you.
And I am James Williams with the Office of Economic Development. I am the Small and Minority Business Development Manager. Concluding Miller 3's presentation on the report, we'll have a few comments and
Okay,
conclude
thank
the
you.
meeting. All right, Dave?
Good evening. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Good evening. My name is Dave Miller, and as Ms. Chief of Staff Washington indicated, I am the Chief Executive Officer of Miller 3 Consulting. Your selected consultant for the performance of the city's disparity study. I bring you greetings from our headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. I would like to start this evening discussion. Is the deck up? Just want to make sure that we are tracking.
Is he going
WITN should have the deck. There we
Okay.
go.
It's coming up now.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
It's up. Thank you.
Because I can't see the deck on my end, I'll just say next slide. Oh, here
Okay.
it comes.
All right.
Perfect. We have it now. So, next slide. I'd like to start this evening discussion acknowledging the courage and commitment of the City of Wilmington's leadership and the Finance Economic Development Committee to commission this disparity study. To the Mayor's Office, the Office of Economic Development, the Procurement Department, as well as many offices and divisions throughout the city, I want to issue a heartfelt thank you for your professionalism and contributions throughout this engagement. Next slide. The discussion will be guided by the outline presented before you. I, along with the project manager for this effort, Sherry Williams, will share with you the background and experience of Miller 3, the prevailing legal framework for disparity studies, our approach and methodology, some quantitative and qualitative findings, and then conclude in conjunction with the city with recommendations. Next slide, please. Having conducted the very first disparity study in 1989 for Hillsborough County in Florida, our leadership in this space is unparalleled. As creators of the disparity study industry, we correctly anticipated the direction of the courts in Richmond v. Croson, which Sherry will speak more about. Since that time, we've remained on the cutting edge, developing techniques to promote and advance economic development through inclusive procurement strategies. As Ms. Washington mentioned, we are a national practice, having conducted over 140 disparity studies for public sector clients at the federal, state, city, and county levels. We have a broad understanding of the region, having completed disparity studies in neighboring Pennsylvania with multiple entities and economic development stewards, including the city of Philadelphia, for which the city of Wilmington MSA is a part of, and the Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce, where we encourage, foster, and support it in an intentional approach to inclusive procurement and diversity, equity, inclusion for public and private sector clients. I now turn the presentation over to Sherry Williams, the project manager for this effort, to talk more about the legal framework. Next slide. Sherry?
Thank you so much, and thank you for this opportunity to talk with you about the work that we've done for the city of Wilmington, and starting with this legal framework established in the Richmond v. Croson case. Next slide, please. In 1989, the Supreme Court established a two-pronged test for those governmental agencies interested in establishing race and gender conscious remedies to address disparity in their jurisdictions. First, the jurisdiction had to show that there was a compelling governmental interest through a factual predicate for an MWBE program. That is through active participant in discrimination, your actions as the public entity, or whether you were a passive participant in discrimination, and that is, have you participated in any disparate treatment, disparate impact that's happening in the marketplace. If you prove that you have a compelling governmental interest, the next step is to show that your program, your initiative is narrowly tailored. That is, the program must be focused on remedying identified discrimination by both race, gender, and procurement category. Next slide, please. There has been a significant amount of litigation regarding Richmond v. Croson, and in doing so, the courts around the country, along with the Supreme Court, have established several parameters for establishing an MWBE program. There must be sunset provisions, graduation provisions, flexible goals tied to availability, and limited impact on third parties. And the last bullet we talked about with narrow tailoring needs to be focused on those groups that have shown statistically significant disparity. Next slide, please. So that legal requirement leads us to the approach and methodology utilized by Miller III Consulting. Next slide, please. Miller III utilizes a 10-part methodology. We start with the industry analysis, which consists of the legal analysis and the procurement and MWBE program operational analysis, which helps us to understand the framework in which an MWBE program is operating. Many of our recommendations flow from the procurement analysis, as you will see. The statistical analysis helps us to determine whether there is actually a disparity in the utilization of minority and women-owned firms. The capacity analysis helps us to understand whether any disparity found is due to factors other than race and gender. The market analysis then helps us to understand the experiences and perceptions of minority and women-owned businesses, as well as non-minority and women-owned businesses, in attempting to do business with you. The race and gender neutral analysis helps us to understand if management and technical assistance providers are effective in resolving issues faced by MWBEs without the utilization of race and gender conscious initiatives. And the marketplace analysis helps us to understand if there is any exclusionary behaviors and practices occurring in the marketplace in general. These analyses leads to conclusions and customized recommendations. I will turn it back over to Dave, who is going to talk to you more about the statistical analysis, and then I will talk with you again about some of our qualitative findings. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Sherry. The quantitative findings of this disparity study highlight the relevant market availability and disparity ratio concept. Next slide. The relevant market is defined as where 70 to 75% of your commercial expenditures for each procurement area are occurring based on the city's utilization analysis. We consider several data points when determining the relevant market, including the city's purchase orders, payments, contracts, and vendor data. The city's MSA is the Philadelphia, Camden, Wilmington Metropolitan Statistical Area. Nationwide is a defined relevant market for architectural and engineering services, professional services, as well as goods and supplies. The relevant market for construction and construction-related services and non-professional services is the Metropolitan Statistical Area. Next slide, please. Here, while very busy, we illustrate the percentage of non-DBE and MWDB participation for commercial expenditures during the study period of fiscal year 2016 through fiscal year 2020. The study captures utilization for each procurement type at 3 distinct levels. At the point of award is indicated by contracts data for formal procurements. At the point of a purchase order, which is when funds are encumbered and the issuance of a PO indicating contract execution. And then lastly, at the stage of payments. The table shows utilization based on the more robust data set for each procurement type. Purchase orders for architectural engineering, goods and supplies, non-professional services, and professional services. And then contracts data for construction is utilized to capture MWDB participation at the subcontractor level. Across all procurement types, irrespective of the utilization measure, non-DBE firms attain over 72% of the city's utilization during the study period. Utilization based on architecture, engineering, and construction, comparatively, MWDBEs achieve larger participation, accounting for 22% and 28% respectively. In particular, WBEs, small business enterprises, and Hispanic American-owned firms in A&E achieved over 3% utilization, while African Americans attained 10.68%. In construction, where the impact of subcontractor participation is captured, minority, women, and disadvantaged business enterprises accounted for 20% of the utilization based on contract awards. WBEs and African American-owned firms received 12.3% and 11.65% respectively. Hispanic, Native American, and Asian American-owned firms received less than 2% in construction based on contract awards during the study period. Among minority, women, and disadvantaged business-owned firms in goods and supplies, non-professional services, and professional services, African Americans attained nearly 2.83% in goods and supplies, 2.93% in non-professional services, and 3.35% in professional services. Asian American-owned firms received 2.42% in professional services and less than 1% in goods and supplies and non-professional services. WBEs received 7.85% in non-professional services. No other minority, women-owned, disadvantaged group achieved over 3% utilization in goods and supplies, professional services, and non-professional services. The next series of slides 13 through 17, we take a deeper look into what's presented here as they highlight utilization based on each procurement type, along with the corresponding availability measures. In short, the slides will depict the parity exists in utilization of firms in relation to their ready, willing, and able availability in the marketplace. Next slide, please. Based on architecture and engineering, in many cases, utilization is very close to RWA availability. The variance is less than 1.5%.
Excuse
Yes.
me. Did you just breeze through page number 13?
No, I'm on slide 13 now.
Okay, all right, okay. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that we were on the same page. You can
Sure.
proceed, thank you.
Thank you. Again, based on architecture and engineering, utilization is very close to RWA availability. White female-owned firms and SBEs were utilized slightly below their proportion of availability, while African-American and Hispanic-American-owned firms' proportion of utilization exceeded their proportion of availability. So for example, if we look at the blue bar, for African Americans, we're comparing 9.38% utilization to the 10.68% availability. Next slide, please.
Excuse me, can you
Yes.
explain, what do you mean by availability and utilization?
Sure. So availability is the percentage of firms in the marketplace. And so, for example, as a hypothetical, let's say there were 10 construction firms, and 4 of those were Hispanic American, 2 were African American, and maybe 1 were Asian Americans. That their percentage of the total would be 40%, 20%, and 10% respectively. And so what we're comparing here is a percentage, proportionate percentage comparison of utilization to availability.
Okay.
And
so-
Dave, if you would quickly define utilization as well.
Yes, and utilization is the actual contract awards, purchase orders issued, or payments made by the city of Wilmington in a defined procurement type. And so on slide 14 here, there was about 64, almost nearly 65 million in construction during the study period based on contracts data. The percentage of utilization for African-American owned firms in construction, which includes subcontractor, was 11.65% compared to their availability marketplace, which is 16.22%. Are you tracking? Are you following me here?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So among the remaining MWBEs, all were utilized less than their RWA availability in construction. Next slide, please. In non-professional services, proportionally parity was achieved for the majority of the groups, with the exception of African Americans and WBEs, where African Americans were utilized at a rate lower than their availability, compared 6.67% to 2.93%. The inverse occurred for WBEs, where they were utilized 3 times their corresponding proportion availability based on those firms identified as ready, willing, and able. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Excuse
For
me,
professional,
one of our council members have a question. Councilmember Spadola?
sure.
Thank you. I'm still struggling with the definition of availability versus utilization.
Yes.
Can you just explain availability again, please?
So availability is defined as those firms who meet the RWA criteria, for which we call ready, willing, and able. Ready means a firm exists in the marketplace. It's very, very akin to your phone book registration. It might have included your business licenses and just business that exists in the marketplace. The
Understood.
willing prong in the definition of RWA is really trying to attribute those firms who have a willingness and an understanding of providing the goods and services for which the city of Wilmington is seeking to procure. And then the last prong of that RWA acronym is whether or not they have the ability, right? And so those firms who meet the cross-section of ready, meaning they exist, they have a willingness, that means they have an understanding, and then the ability to perform the services is how we define availability. Now, there's availability based on multiple levels. Level 1 availability is attributed to those who respond to your formal procurement opportunities. Said differently, those who submit bids or those who submit formal proposals in reaction to those opportunities that are on the street become a part of that availability pool.
Thank you.
Utilization is a more straightforward measure. That is, those firms who represent the commercial activities and provide the commercial goods and services that the city of Wilmington has procured. And so if whomever you are using to provide your goods and supplies and your services at their respective levels based on the value of their payments, based on the value of the purchase orders, and based on the value of their contract awards are presented here.
Thank
And
you.
I hope that was a better sure.
Yeah, so the availability, for our perspective, it basically shows context. It shows how many firms are out there ready to do business.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I would like to pause for a second to see if any other council members have any questions in the room here or on the line. Councilmember Oliver?
Yes, I'll wait till he finishes the presentation. Thank you.
Councilmember White?
Thank you.
Councilmember White speaking. Follow up on Commissioner, Councilmember Spadola's comments. What's the able definition of able, and how is that defined?
So able is defined as those firms having the ability and the capacity to provide the goods and services to the city. Right? And so
As defined by what? Their ability to have their contract accepted? What's that availability based on again? The ableness based on?
based on their ability to provide said goods and services. There's an inherent belief that if a business goes through the process of submitting a proposal, which takes time, money, and considerations, there's an inherent belief that they have the ability to provide such services.
And
Follow up.
the information, are you using the city's procurement system or other procurements? Well, I guess. What's the name of the city's procurement system?
So the city utilizes the Munis system, but the contents and what goes into availability are measures such as those who bid to the formal opportunities, both successful and unsuccessful. Those who are awarded informal procurements, that is, they were issued below the formal procurement threshold, either via way of quoting process, as well as those firms who were paid by the city.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Any council members on the line, if you have a question, please feel free to ask it at this time. Okay, if none, we'll proceed.
Thank you. So for professional services, there's nearly $65 million expended during the study period. Among minority and women-owned disadvantaged businesses, Asian American-owned firms were the only group utilized above their proportionate RWA availability measure. All other MWEs were utilized lower than their respective availability in the marketplace. Next slide, please. Finally, with goods and supplies, where traditionally the relevant market extends beyond the MSA and the state, as was the case here for the city of Wilmington, among MWBE firms, all were utilized lower than their proportionate availability, and the highest utilization percentage was with African American owned firms at 2.8%. 0.3%. Next slide, please. So we present utilization and availability together in those preceding slides to create a visual for you to help understand the disparity ratio concept. Next slide. The concept considers and compares the proportionate utilization to its proportionate availability of both non-DBEs and minority, women-owned, and disadvantaged businesses by procurement type. And then we utilize a statistical significance testing to determine if an inference of discrimination has occurred. Next slide, please. The cross-section of utilization to availability seeks to determine if parity exists, which is represented by the red line, red horizontal line. Parity is defined as when groups are utilized proportionately to their availability in the marketplace. Where the disparity ratio falls below the red line of parity, underutilization is then found. Conversely, when utilization exceeds availability, overutilization is found, for which we test for statistical significance. Next slide, please. Here, the numerical disparity calculations and significant test findings are presented. I believe the next slide is a better illustration of the results of over and underutilization, as well as statistical significance. So next slide, please, and I'll explain this preceding slide. So here, the red indicates a value, a ratio that reaches statistically significant, and the blue represents non-statistical significance. The horizontal line at 1 is a line of parity. Therefore, when a bar is red and falls below the horizontal parity line, statistically significant underutilization has been identified and an inference of discrimination can be drawn from the quantitative results. Non-significant statistical determinations are in blue. Next slide, please. Disparity study findings that support race-conscious programmatic initiatives and remedies are highlighted in blue for each minority, women, disadvantaged business group by procurement type. So for example, Hispanic American-owned firms in all but construction, you can devise a MWE program that is designed to remedy the found instances of discrimination. I will now turn the balance of the presentation over to Sherry to discuss the qualitative findings. Sherry?
Thank you, Dave. And we know that this is a lot of information. Next slide, please. A lot of information being presented in a very short period of time. So please ask any questions for clarity that you need.
I'm sorry, before you go on, we do have a question from our legislative staff.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just one question on the utilization charts that you presented. Is there an industry standard that you compare this to, or is there such thing as an industry standard for all the different categories?
Well, this is truly based on uniqueness of the city of Wilmington and some of its priorities in acquiring goods and supplies and services. I will say that there is some comparative benchmarks as it relates to the procurement types, but the individual utilization and is really reflective of the business community. And as you are aware, that could change as you move through various municipalities and entities.
Okay. And Madam Chair?
Yes.
And as we're looking at slide 23, where you pointed out the disparity ratios for the items that are highlighted in disparity, those are the items basically we should be concerned about, in your opinion?
Yes, those are areas where the quantitative findings support an inference for which you can develop programmatic initiatives to support remedying the past instances of discrimination. Yes.
Madam Chair.
Councilmember Spadola.
Thank you. Is there an appendix available that would show the companies that you put into these buckets?
Well, there is, yes, and I'm hesitating because I'm thinking about the data sets that we provided to the city already. One of the things that we do as a part of our sort of ceremonious conclusion, closing out process, particularly when the recommendations support broader outreach, is provide our clients our master directory or listing of businesses in the community. We do this in an effort to arm you with businesses who are out there who might not have known about it or shown any interest in contracting with the city, but there's a goal to increase the current vendor pool because we recognize availability across MWBEs isn't as high as we have seen in other municipalities and jurisdictions. Said differently, the vendor availability pool is based on the city of Wilmington's data. And so if you think about your business licensing data, your vendor registration data, as well as those firms who have actively been engaged and contracted with the city of Wilmington. On top of that master MWBE listing, there's a very robust number of firms that the city can utilize to target its outreach efforts.
Councilmember Oliver.
Thank you, Madam President. Just looking at the summary of this disparity, it is troubling that you see that it's obvious that on page 23, the disparity that minority contractors and Native American contractors have been going through for years. This is not nothing new to us. This has been going on for years, way before this administration. I've talked to some other individuals, so this is nothing new, but it's sad that economic development and some other organizations are very aware of this. And as to my council colleague's question, economic development has all the information for as an index of the racial disparity that has been occurred. One of the questions I have is what are some of the best practices for making procurement easier to navigate?
Well, I don't want to steal some of Sherry's thunder. I think that is coming later in the deck.
Okay.
And so if
we'll hold off on that, but
Okay.
so I'll hold off on my questions because I did say the end, but when you were saying ask questions, I didn't know where you were going. But I'm looking at page 23. Also looking at page 22, you can see where the disparity in the charts is obvious that there has been some, you could say racial profiling or neglecting from procurement. All this goes around bidding, and it's been an ongoing issue for years with the bidding process, and it's really sad. So I'm glad. I give you kudos, Miller Consultant, for coming up with this this report that was way overdue. I mean, you just look at the numbers to speak for itself, and it's really sad. And I wait till the end to make a comment about Earl Cooper because I see him in the room. Okay, that's
Thank
it.
you. Councilmember White.
Mr. Miller, help me out. So, you know, the national unemployment percentage is based actually on the number of people actually looking for a job. Is there in your professional opinion, historically, vendors of color or women-owned businesses who have not been successful in the bidding process for whatever reason, how do we quantify, or do we even have that discussion about those people not even applying or participating in the city's procurement because of past past practices. Is that a part of your thought process at all, or does it matter?
It does matter. And this is why
I'm
at
sorry,
times-
that was Commissioner White speaking. I'm sorry for the public.
Yes, Commissioner White, it does matter. One of the things that we believe happens often is particularly when you're unsuccessful in the public sector, where there is a compelling governmental interest based on you supporting the tax base and the tax structure and being available in the marketplace, that when you are unsuccessful in that arena, it could leave a bad taste in a vendor's mouth. And that could invariably lead to them bidding less, right? And so how does that impact or weigh in on this disparity study? If you are not formally responding or in some shape or fashion coming forward to the city, maybe that is registering as an available as a part of the city's vendor registry, indicating the types of goods and supplies you service, whether or not you are submitting a formal procurement, then you are part of what we call potential availability. And the goal is to attract those firms who either historically elected not to pursue opportunities or just haven't been successful. And so the goal is to attract them to increase your pool of those firms who meet the RWA criteria.
Thank you. Thank you,
You're welcome. I'm going to ask the council members, because we have several pages to get through, and I know that we have some procurement findings. I think that some of the questions, we may get the answers later on in the presentation, but I'm asking that you at least just circle the page number and maybe jot down your question, and then we'll come back to the questions after we allow them to finish their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And many of your questions are covered in the qualitative findings. So let's go to the next slide and talk about procurement. I spoke earlier about many of our recommendations flow from our review and analysis of your procurement system. When we are looking at your procurement system, we're looking to determine whether it is open, fair, transparent, and inclusive. And it is very important to remember that inclusion does not occur in a vacuum. It is imperative that your procurement system, it has openness, fairness, and transparency, because that supports the ability of your staff to be inclusive. And so that's what we're looking at. The major finding that we had in looking at your procurement system is the decision about a decentralized system. For us, centralization or decentralization is neither good or bad. What we're looking at is whether you have the infrastructure in place to support the decision that you've made. So in this decentralized environment, we were looking for, is there the appropriate and needed infrastructure to support a system that is open, fair, transparent, and inclusive? And what we found is that there were issues with that infrastructure, both from the process standpoint and the people standpoint. In terms of the people, there was limited training on procurement and DBE rules and regulations. You have very, very extensive written policies as it relates to DBE. The issue is the implementation of those established policies and procedures. Additionally, the procurement function is more of an administrative function in this decentralized environment. And all of that has an impact on the ability to be inclusive. It also provides some limitations on the ability to be collaborative and to respond in real time to the needs and issues of DBEs. And what you see here on the screen are those issues that flow out of your system: limited training, inconsistent implementation of DBE policies, the overuse of bid waivers, and so forth and so on. So these are all about your system. And if you take away anything from this procurement discussion, it is those 4 words: open, fair, transparent, and inclusive. Let's go to the next slide. So the anecdotal testimony that we received from 20 firms that participated in 5 focus groups actually buttresses the procurement findings, because what those participants were talking about was what is their experience when they approach the city and attempt to do business with the city. What we found and the feedback that we got was that while some of the interviewees were doing business outside of the city of Wilmington, the agency, but within city limits, within the MSA, and within nationwide, they were unable to get work with the city itself. Their DBE certifications were not helpful to them in getting business from the city. Now, these other bullet points, I think you can connect them back to the discussion that we just had about the procurement system, because what they're having problems with is getting access to staff in a decentralized system. To build relationships, they got to go to the different departments. And for small businesses, which most DBEs are, that takes a lot of time, effort, and money that they may not have. They were not getting notices of bidding opportunities for small dollar contracts where capacity should not be an issue, and they were not getting notice of professional services and A&E opportunities. They talked about the repeated use of the same vendors and of the use of minority and women fronts. We actually had a minority female who reported being asked directly to be a front. There were problems with long payment terms and with the unwillingness of prime contractors to utilize DBEs unless there was some kind of goal, enforced goal in place. And lastly, there were some testimony of primes listing DBEs without the intention to utilize them. So if there's no contract compliance in the procurement system to check to see whether DBEs are being utilized, these kinds of practices can occur between primes and their subs. Next slide, please. And finally, we talk about the race neutral analysis, where we looked at over 41 race neutral programs and interviewed 9 executive directors of those programs. And the main things that came out of those interviews was about lack of relationships and lack of trust, as well as not having access to the resources that they needed and not being ready and prepared to capitalize on that access if they indeed gained access to that. So the need for training and education, the need for access to capital, the need for information communication or technology, and the need for improved engagement with your Hispanic community. So those are the findings of our disparity study from the qualitative side. There are additional analyses which are pretty complex, so we did not go over them here, the capacity analysis as well as the marketplace analysis, and we would encourage you to review those in both the executive summary and the full report. But if you have any questions before we turn it over to James and Tanya, please feel free to ask us any questions.
President Congo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You just mentioned that someone was asked to be a front for a business. Are you able to share with us who they were asked by a business or by the city?
They were asked by another business.
This is a business that has done business with the city before?
I would have to go back and look at the anecdote. I don't recall right off the top of my head that, but it was a business that she had experience with.
Okay. If you're able to get that information, please, that would be very helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any council members on the line? Councilmember Oliver?
Thank you. Again, to Miller Consulting Company, I mean, most of the questions I was going to ask, I see it's already reflected in the report. So I do appreciate everything you're saying, such as, lack of notice from DBEs, using the same vendors. I mean, everything's right in here, any type of question. So you really did your research, and I really appreciate it, because most of this stuff we already know, but to just see it obvious in the face is good. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, you can proceed.
Okay, so at this time, thank you, Miller 3, for that information. At this time, Ms. Tanya Pope will give us some information regarding the recommendations which came out of the study, and then I'll spend some time talking about the actions that we have already begun in many cases to rectify some of the issues here.
Thank you, James, and thank you for having me, Council. My name is Tanya Pope. I'm the principal of the Pope Consulting Group, and I am the supplier diversity consultant for the Office of Economic Development, working directly with Mr. James Williams and Mr. Sean Park. I am here to lend my expertise and background to what it is that we're going to do going further now that we have recommendations. So I'd like to outline for you the recommendations that were provided to us by Miller 3 and give you a sense of what it is they think the city of Wilmington needs to do to get this ship on course to the openness and inclusiveness that Miller 3 talked about. The recommendations were provided in 4 categories. The first category was the identification of race and gender conscious goal possibilities. The next category were enhancements to procurements and DBE procedures and practices. The third area where they provided recommendations was the long-term availability and capacity building initiatives, and the fourth was expanded DBE initiatives. I'll talk with you just very briefly about some of the specific recommendations in each category, and I'm reading directly from the Miller 3 report.
Okay.
On page 29, the first area of recommendations were the identification of race and, I'm sorry, this is not on page 29, on race and gender conscious goal possibilities. What I want to do is to take you back to the chart that Miller 3 had provided on page 23, if you're able to go back to that chart. And where they've identified the greatest areas are where there is statistical significance of disparity. That means it's not a small amount of disparity, it's a large amount of disparity. And so I wanted to take you to this chart because it easily highlights with the asterisks where that statistical significance of disparity has occurred. And that will help you to better see The blue denotes where racial and gender-conscious remedies might be utilized. So if you look at goods and supplies, everyone in that category, African American, Asian American, Hispanic American, and WBE, it reflects an area where potential racial or gender-conscious remedies might be utilized, as well as significant disparity. So I would love it if you could look at the chart through that lens to better help you to see where the work is most needed. If you go back to page 29, we go to the second area of recommendations, which talks about enhancements to procurement and DBE procedures and practices. And here, the focus is really on changing the procurement environment. So its focus is inclusive procurement, not just goal attainment. That's a very important recommendation because it means looking through a different lens. They've also noted that the decentralized nature of the city of Wilmington is a challenge to having that inclusive environment. You really, in a decentralized environment, need to have uniform practices and procedures across every agency for that to work. And that's some of what they pointed out. They identified that there were economic development and inclusive procurement objectives that could be achieved, and that the procurement and DBE training and development was needed throughout the internal staff, particularly those who are the buyers and make those buying decisions.
Council President.
Yes, thank you. Can you explain, you said, address the decentralized nature of the city of Wilmington. What does that mean?
Well, decentralized means that pretty much, and I'm going to ask James for some help here, each agency has its own processes and procedures to buy the things that they need to have the city operate.
Okay.
The ideal would be is if there was a unified, universal method of procurement that was adhered to by every agency with the same goals, objectives, and efforts. Did you want to say more about
Correct.
that?
So there's no one department that's responsible for all the purchasing that happens, or all the contracts that happens. There is some ability for the departments themselves to purchase, up to certain thresholds and whatnot. And then at the same time, there's not necessarily a centralized oversight and compliance function as well. So I think that's what we refer to as decentralized.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
My question, based on what you just said, are you saying the processes are different, or the systems are different, or both?
I think when I think about it, it comes down to who's the who takes ownership of the program, right? So I think that every department has some role, some functions that they play, versus there being one central department who does all the purchasing or who manages all of the DBE program, especially components.
Okay. Council Member Oliver, and then Council Member Spadola.
Well, I'm looking at the enhancement procurement on page 29, and it says the DB training development to all staff throughout the city that impact the buying decision, which is not every department in the city of Wilmington. Economic development, you have to take ownership because y'all lead that process for as far as the DEBs and the procurement process. So if just to answer, just to respond what you said, this would come down to procurement, which is an accounting, and this also comes down to economic development. It wouldn't relate to, from my opinion, wouldn't relate to Parks and Recreation. So when you say, let me finish, when you we got to take some ownership here. This whole study is around the process of procurement, which falls on the back of economic development. But I understand what you're saying, but just the way you said it. Okay, so go ahead.
Fair enough, and I think there's an opportunity, right, to improve the
Okay, well,
situation
opportunity.
by
Right.
Perhaps centralizing certain functions such as compliance and oversight, things that we'll get into in some of the action
Right.
items.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Ms. Pope, in your experience, do most municipalities the size of Wilmington, do they have like a chief procurement officer where everything is centralized, like we're talking about?
Typically, in a city the size of Wilmington, they do not have that function. You know, it's not a city that may have the funding or resources to be able to have a chief procurement officer. It's not unusual to see cities the size of Wilmington to have a decentralized makeup of their agency population. But what can be different is that when everybody's utilizing a uniform set of standards, processes, and procedures that are have oversight, can make it more effective.
And one of the eye-opening things, as I read through the report, and which was alluded to, but maybe not enough attention paid, was that up to a certain threshold, sure, things can be centralized, right up to $60,000. Procurement team, they have very specific policies and rules. But then as you get into some of the lower dollar amounts, where many small businesses do or could have opportunities, that's where things get a little bit more decentralized, right? There's not as many guidelines, and there's more leeway for the departments to make their own decisions that don't necessarily fall under DBE guidelines or even meet the intention of the DBE program. So we'll get into some of that as we get into
So the buyers at that level have greater discretion on how they procure those smaller contracts and awards. The next section, number 3, talks about, sorry.
I would like to acknowledge Council Member Fields sitting in the room and Council Member Cabrera on the line.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
The third section of the recommendations provided by Miller 3 talked about the long-term availability and capacity building initiatives, basically creating a greater pipeline of the number of firms that are certified as MBEs and/or DBEs or WBEs to do work with the city. Some of the things that they had recommended were youth entrepreneurship initiatives, increasing the pipeline of DBEs by reaching out to the master list of DBEs that they have identified, as well as using some other tools that we know are in the marketplace, and expanding competition by taking a deeper dive into the city's procurement and bidding practices that pretty much eliminate competition on specific bids. And so there are a lot of things that you can do to enhance the opportunity there. James is going to talk about some of them in a moment. And
Council Member White.
First, I applaud the administration and council for taking this initiative. Councilwoman Alderson, all over it. Not to be so, there's nothing there.
Right.
But one of the things.
Speak in the microphone, Council Member.
I'm sorry, Councilmember White. One of the things that you just said was commented in the report, and it seems like to some extent we're chasing our tail. Mr. Miller said this report indicated that there's not much stock in being certified at DBE as opposed to the vendors. There's not, certification did not provide them anything, little to nothing. So, and you mentioned these conscious biases, but a lot of what happens is unconscious biases, and I've not heard anything about that. But more alarmingly, when I read a report and they use the word discriminatory practices associated with city government, it just heightens my concern. So I hear what you're saying. You want to widen the pool. You believe DBE certification is somehow going to do something that the report already told you that it doesn't do. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, if we look at those anecdotal comments, and I understand what anecdotal means, that is the heart of the matter. And I would hope that the administration, I'm sure council will, take those comments to heart. But if we're just going to do the same old, And if we're not talking about unconscious biases, and I've not heard anything that eliminates discriminatory practices, I just think we're going down a rabbit hole that does not end well. And just before I end, Madam Chair, if you may, just one more comment. I've not heard anybody comment on the fact that the earning power of a self-employed African-American firm is $27,000 less. So when we're talking about, this report to me means that possibly city residents who own minority businesses can economically not take care of their families in the way that they want to, or the way that they need to. And that is problematic on a lot of levels in terms of the city's ability to collect wage taxes. But I don't want to go down that hole. But I just want to have, I hope, as a result of this, we actually have an honest conversation about the next steps. That's what I want. I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
No, thank you for the questions. I just want to say, you know, for the record, that the administration is very aware of the fact that this whole process is long overdue. And one of the purposes of actually the administration investing the money to get the disparity study done was primarily to find out, you know, what the study comes up with, what the findings are. And of course, we know with audits and studies of this nature that once the findings are identified, the administration, the economic development, and as well as city council, we will have the responsibility of taking the information that they have identified to address it, put in some corrective actions, as well as leading to some legislation. So I just wanted to say for the record that we knew exactly that there would be some opportunities for improvement that came out of this study. So again, for the record, for the public, we want to just say that we're not totally surprised. We knew that we were going to find, you know, some findings. That's what we paid for, and we're glad that we're uncovering some of these issues so we can address them. So I just wanted to say that for the public. And we are going to continue to proceed to get to the end of the presentation so we can wrap it up, and we'll, you know, decide on what we're going to do from that point.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
And I will just lastly say some of the recommendations about expanding the DBA initiatives. I don't have to read them to you. They're all right here. And they're things like, you know, bonding, speeding up the time it takes a contractor to get paid, and maximizing the use of some other programs and models that have been seen across the country. I want to now turn it over to James Williams because a lot of these action items have already started, and I'm very excited about him to tell you about it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Pope. So I've been kind of chomping at the bit to talk about some of the action steps because I know that that's what people want to hear. The city has been doing a lot of work to start to address some of the recommendations. That Miller 3 was so great with putting together, you know, the report and giving us all the information that we need to really justify some meaningful change and to focus our attention on the areas that needed you know, that attention to make the change. We formed a working group back in November, which has been meeting weekly. At least for this year, we've been meeting weekly. But we basically, with the help of the Pope Consulting Group, laid out all of the action steps and for a number of changes and things that we wanted to pursue to really help to modernize the city's DBE program. So to Council Member White, forgive me, we don't want this to be the same old, same old. You know, I think that there's a lot of opportunities to modernize the program. I think that most of what's been on the books has been there since the early 90s, if I'm not mistaken. So there will be some opportunities to do things legislatively, but also policy and procedure-wise internally with the city that we have a lot of control over without having to necessarily write legislation. Some of the things that stood out that we're pursuing, and we've been doing demos and learning more about what offerings are available, has been to improve the city's technology that we use. To the point of, you know, having technology procurement workflow tool, something that can enhance what we're able to, one, do within the city, so automating a lot of processes, but also allowing us to capture data that can allow us to set goals and do meaningful things that can have meaningful change. So we've been interviewing several technology providers, some of which are county and state or government organizations are also going to be using. So we're looking to align where it's possible to make the process as consistent for many of our constituents. So technology. Secondly, centralizing functions, as we spoke about briefly earlier, centralizing functions where it makes sense, such as the compliance function and oversight, so that now, we have someone who is able to monitor bids that were submitted against what's actually being done once the project starts. So I know that within the city, there's a request for some resources to handle this project, these functions interdepartmentally. So that's something that we're working on as well. In addition to, I guess the third sort of theme that stood out is increasing capacity for our minority business community. So we're working with community partners and providers who can do things such as providing bonding support to help set small businesses up with achieving bonding, affordable bonding that can allow them to compete on city contracts. Setting up technical support providers.
Excuse me, do you have this documented, or are you just reading off of your notes?
I'm reading off of my notes, but we have an action plan that that I'm working with our partners to really go through all the recommendations and address the issues that are there.
Okay,
So, but I can certainly outline anything that I'm saying for you and share it with you later.
Okay, all right, just wanted to make sure that,
So-
we were not missing something up here.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, this is just, I wanted to add to what we're actually actively doing for the past few months, actually. So,
So, I'm sorry, I do have another question. So this study is not an audit as it relates to findings and corrective actions. You're just basically identifying what you found and gave it, to the city, of course, versus an actual audit where you have to implement corrective actions and then you come back to see if they were followed up. I'm just trying to get an understanding of what process we're working with here. Just a study, you don't come back to see if the findings were resolved. I'm just asking the question.
not to speak for Miller 3, but I think they'd be happy to come back in a few years and kind of measure our progress against the recommendations that they have provided.
So it's not an audit, it's just.
It's not an audit, but it's I think it's more of a measured approach at looking at where, the city stands against.
Understood. I just wanted to make sure, when you started talking about what your departments have already started doing, I was trying to figure out, was it based on a corrective action that was assigned to your department? That's what made me ask that question. So it's basically a study, the findings to let you know where you stand and what you need to fix. I get it. I get it now. Thank you. Councilmember Oliver.
Thank you, Madam President. What I would like to say, James, if you have that, and you said you've been working on it for months, I'm wondering why you just can't send it to us, or you could have had it in the package tonight, so we could be following you, just to follow up basic what Councilwoman said. You said you've been working on this for several months. This information, correct?
So
And I'm just saying that because
we have
did-
begun the
and
process,
only-
yeah.
Excuse me, I'm sorry to follow up. And the only reason why I'm saying that is because normally when we come in here with something like that, it is in a package, because we do have a long agenda, not just writing down stuff and come up and take up a whole lot more time when we already had the findings. And I just feel as though you could have had that printed out and had it in a package, and we could be following you and not just taking notes. That's just my opinion, Madam President.
Okay. All right.
I'd be happy to share that with you
Duly
in a few
noted.
days. Thank you.
All right. You can proceed.
So really, I was just trying to communicate that, the city has been working towards, addressing some of the recommendations, some of the shortcomings that were found in the study. This is a process that, there are some things we can do short term. There are some things that may take years to really put into place. But there is an ongoing activity that's interdepartmental to address the recommendations that were provided by Miller 3.
Okay. All right. Councilmember Field and then President Congo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just want to say, so basically, before you wrote anything, you gathered the info, you got your data and your analysis, you gathered that information, and you seen that there were some, and just tell me if I'm wrong, you seen where there were some issues or concerns that you can actually get to at a faster pace. So those are the ones you chose to address without writing down like the list that you're giving us now. Am I correct? And then you're gonna come back and give us everything?
Exactly. Yeah, we're able to provide updates, as needed for the committee, for council. So I think to the point that was made, not everything that was in the report was necessarily new. Plus, we've been working with Miller 3 along the whole time on this, right? So it was something that where there's low-hanging fruit that we could start to address, we've done that.
So you just wanted to catch what you could catch now, address that, and then as the problems as the data showed you larger issues, those are the ones that you're working on, and you're going to present us with more information. Am I correct?
As we hit critical milestones in sort of the process here, in this journey, if you will, we'll for sure be giving updates, if not asking for support for things that need council approval and things of that nature.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. I think there may be a perception that since we're getting this today, that this is sort of like, okay, we're getting started on it, but it sounds like you received the report from Miller's a couple months ago.
Well, the report's been in draft status, so we've, no high level, but we've worked with them to get it finalized and to get to this point. So that doesn't mean that we waited for it to get to final before we started taking actions that we could take. There's been things that I've been doing, trying to improve, since I've been in this role for a little bit over a year, to just try to improve that I thought would be, beneficial to the program, such as improving outreach, attending more, hosting and attending more events with our community partners to help network and create more opportunities. So, I didn't want it to, I think you correctly said that this is just the beginning of the journey. And it's not that, that we've been working on this for months, but the report's been in the draft status, and we've been
Okay.
analyzing it and working through it.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to just say this one thing. So will the council be able to see what they found and then what you have worked on? So we'll at least know, okay, this is what was found and this is, what you need to work on. Because if you're working on it and you've started working on it, we don't really, unless you, share with us, this is what was found and this is what needs to be worked on, even if you started working on it. I'm just saying, and I'm not gonna hold up the meeting, but I just wanted to put that out there because I'm learning information, as you are sharing. So I think that will be a good idea to just share what the findings were and what the recommendations are and what you're working on.
Fair enough. And a good resource is the press release that was sent out today. We appended action items to all the recommendations,
Okay.
Which are basically the notes that I was looking to share and highlight.
Okay.
But every recommendation that's in there has an action item and at least a description of what we're doing to address that.
Okay, all right.
Follow up.
Councilmember Oliver.
Thank you. That's what my point was. It's all right here. We have it right here. That's why I just wondered why.
Okay.
I was waiting for you to say, you have it up there, but you wouldn't say it. I'm like, that's why she probably going to come. I'm like, why are we repeating this in here? But I get it. I was trying to be
Apologies,
nice
yeah,
about it.
just
but-
came to mind as I was saying that.
Thank you. Councilmember White, did you have something?
No, Madam
Okay.
Chair.
All right, you can proceed.
That's all that I really have for today. I think that this is, as I mentioned, this is the beginning of a process, and I think we're off to a good start, and we look forward to working with you all to make some meaningful changes.
Okay, and after Council President, we need to ask if there's any questions from the public. Council President?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What level of transparency will there be? I know you said you're going to share some information with council, but what about for the public? And I know that we have recognized our deficiency of not having sufficient outreach to different contractors. So how will we get them information about the findings and what were the recommendations and what we're doing on an ongoing basis?
I think that as we hit sort of critical milestones, and when there's a story to communicate, that there will be press releases and information to be shared.
Okay. All right, thank you. And I have one more question.
Okay.
I can't remember. It slipped my mind. It'll come back to me.
Maybe
So
come
you can
back
reach
to
out to me
you.
anytime, Council President.
Okay. Okay, Chief of Staff Washington?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to thank the committee for allowing us to present the report this evening. All the materials will be located on the city's website. And to the question that the president asked about council finding out about the status of our action plan, as we work through the process, we will come back to the committee to give you updates periodically on where we are with this. But I just want to thank you again for allowing us to share this report.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Council President?
Yes, thank you. I remember. You mentioned some of the recommendations may take years to implement. Like, could you give us an example of what might take years?
Well, certainly, some of the things that'll take a bit of time are the decision on a technology solution, the implementation and training and the rollout of that for the city. With respect to a few other issues, there may be some need to look carefully at the implementation of mentor protege or youth initiatives or some of the other things that take a lot of building and finding a provider and having the resources for. So I think most of the things in the recommendations are touch points that are being managed every day by the agency and by the mayor's office and their staff. So those are the things I would think about. Like some of the technology solutions might take a little bit longer. Okay. And then some things that require additional funding or resources where they have to come to whomever to get the money, may take a little longer.
Okay, just one more follow-up, please.
Sure.
How do we and how does the public monitor our process and our just doing better? How do we do that? Because we've been down this road before, at least legislatively. Like we've introduced different laws to try to make sure that more DBs have been included, but we see that it hasn't worked. So who's going to monitor this? I don't trust us to monitor ourselves, so I think we need to really look into who's going to make sure that we're doing what we say we're going to do.
Right, and I think part of it starts with goal setting, which is also part of the recommendations and part of what we're looking to implement. So I think that the process will include obviously oversight. I mean, there's already oversight that's written in the city's legislation. So I think it'll be enhancements or at least sort of refreshing some of what's already there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the best answer.
But we haven't talked, just a follow-up, Madam Chair. May I have a follow-up?
Yes.
Thank you. So we haven't discussed the opportunity to have an outside overseer, almost like someone just to monitor it. I don't know, because like I said, we've been here, we've talked about it, things haven't really improved. So I just don't want to be talking about this in another year, 2 years, 3 years, or even 6 months. I want us to be held accountable by some type of outside entity that says that we're doing what we say we're going to do.
Okay, point taken. And that's something that we'll take back to the working group and figure out how the best way to include that type of oversight.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so before we transition to the next item, I need to ask if we have any questions from the public. Is anyone on the line from the public that have a question? Anyone in the room from the public that have a question? State your name, please.
Earl Cooper, my company, Everyone Can Achieve. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions. Is one, I'm very troubled by, on page 19 of the overusage of non-DBEs, which makes a statement that it is a reoccurring opportunity for a company that has already performing, getting another opportunity to perform more. So that's a very striking statement here. The other side, and I think President has addressed that, is some type of oversight. I do have the opportunity to deal with this from the construction arena, and oversight has always been the only way through persistencies that we have been able to be consistent and having at least a fair opportunity to be able to do that. Another one is I didn't see where there are opportunities, what we would call, to be in the room, and I just want to suggest this as the form of bid meetings. We don't get an opportunity to see who the prime contractors are anymore the way we used to, and to be able to have conversation with them or to at least voice our opinion during those times. We don't see what you all know, the fiasco that just happened on the last bid, where the winner, and we talk about a level playing field or consistency with rules. It was a winner. The winner ended up working with DBEs, or the conversation was he had too much non-participation with his firm. The problem with that is that that isn't a consistency, because he did it as we would normally do it. And without having a bid meeting to share that there's a different ruling on this particular bid and there's a different compliance that you have to go by, it gave a lot of hopes for a lot of DBEs that this winner had opportunity to participate, and then it was pulled because he had too much participation, and it ended up going to another person. So those are things that aren't consistent when you look at the procurement piece of it. And if you don't know or who's there to say, and maybe a bid meeting could have helped in that case to say, here go an opportunity that's going to be a little different. Thank you.
Thank you. And I hope, since we have our economic development personnel here, hopefully, you heard what was stated, and hopefully there can be some follow-up. That sounds like an opportunity for sure, right? That we can possibly address. So, did you want to comment on it?
Oh, no, just absolutely. I know Mr. Cooper well,
Okay.
so we'll be in touch and we'll continue that conversation.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, so we are going to wrap up this particular presentation. I want to say thank you to the Miller Group. Thank you very much for this comprehensive study. It is very comprehensive, which is great. I mean, it looks like you didn't leave a stone unturned here. So we just want to say thank you for your work, and thank you for this presentation on today. And is there anything that you want to say before we go to our next item?
I would like to invite Dave Miller to have a final comment.
Thank you, council members and Ms. Pope. It was encouraging to hear the conversation and the dialogue that was just happening through two lenses. One of the primary concerns of us as disparity study consultants is ensuring that this body of work, where we truly learn a lot about the organization, what things are in place that impact the ecosystem of developing inclusive procurement strategies, right? Many things that we heard Councilmember Trippi mention was around the bridge between the findings and implementation, and then how do you monitor that going forward? one of the things that I've been saying to our clients is there is a shift happening away from just goal-based programs to really evaluation based on how you are performing and operating in this space. And so to the extent that the infrastructure is in place, the resources are in place, there are some very tangible insights that can come out of this. So for example, when you talk about how you're performing, there you can take a data-driven approach to determine if you're getting more bids now as a result of your intentional but also focused outreach efforts, because those focused outreach efforts, you're having matchmaking organizations based on real time and real opportunity. And so once you embrace the forecasting of those opportunities, you then allow for minority and women-owned businesses to fare a little bit better in the marketplace. But all of these conversations, we encourage this dialogue because it is a 360-degree circle. There are varying vantage points for the business community to play. I mentioned at the outset that this council had the courage and commitment. And I think what will follow this is a desire from the community to see tangible improvement in this space. So we welcome and would love to support you along your continued journey.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I also want to thank our economics department as well for working along with Miller Consulting. And so before we end your session here, do you have anything to say?
No, just that I look forward to, continuing to take this process forward and to making some meaningful changes. It's been a pleasure working with Miller 3 as well. I have to give them a shout out. They did a great job.
All right. Thank you very President Council? Oh, yes. Mr. Miller, I was asked to ask you if you could share your contact information.
Sure. I'm certain Mr. Williams has it since this is a public forum. Those who are interested can definitely get it from him. But we are on the web at www.miller3group. I'll give you my email address. It's dmillerjr@miller3group.com.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sure.
All right. So thank
you so much
for the presentation. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. So we're going to have a small change in the agenda. We're going to take item number 4. We're going to go next with item number 4. And then after item number 4, we'll pick up with the update on the ARPA funds. So at this time, who do we have here to speak to the resolution requesting the administration to assess nighttime and weekend parking?
We have me, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember
And
Spola.
I thank you for accommodating my agenda change. We've been talking a lot about parking reforms for some time now. Myself and a couple other council members have been going to a lot of civic association meetings to get feedback in person. I've had a survey that's gotten well over 100 responses. And one of the things that came up consistently, and Councilmember Hartley at Midtown probably was the most enthusiastic about it when we were at the Midtown meeting, but also at 40 Acres, specifically, residents have a lot of parking issues overnight and during the weekend. As we turn the page into a thoughtful parking enforcement system, I thought it'd be wise for us to consider that. Is it possible to do very tactful weekend and nighttime enforcement where it's necessary and warranted by the residents? Because in addition to the neighborhood concerns, you hear about there's zero parking on downtown. Multiple times I've driven down there trying to go out to eat, and you can't get a spot, and you turn around. And that's also you go to any city in the Northeast, you go to Philly, you go to Newark, you expect to pay for parking.
Right.
At night, on the weekend. The city here, we're just giving it away. And I think it could help make parking more ample if there was an appropriate cost to it. Because the other component to that is the city is basically subsidizing it for car owners to the chagrin of the non-car owners. So it's something that's being subsidized by people who own a car and by people who don't own a car as well, which is not fair to them. If you don't have a car, you don't need parking, you shouldn't be subsidizing it. So this would make it more equitable by having, appropriate fee structures in place. And so really this is just to, show the will of council. I spoke with the mayor on my way to the meeting tonight. Philosophically, it sounds like the administration is on board. They already have people looking into it, not prepared to speak about it tonight. So I think, it's something that, and keep in mind, when we reduce the parking fee from $40 to $25, assuming it will pass, the hit to the city budget, I remember hearing, is $1 million. So that's $1 million in real money that the city will be missing. And that's appropriately so, because a lot of the tickets that have been issued in the past were bad tickets. But so if we can have, doing weekend nighttime parking, or where people pay for it, downtown specifically, that could be a win-win where people have more parking spots and the city is able to bring in some revenue. So those are my thoughts on that, Madam Chair, and I thank you for the opportunity to discuss it.
Yes, so I know that John Rago has sent you an email. Do you think that that should be shared? Was that up to your discretion?
Yeah, I mean, if somebody from the administration wants to speak about it, they can, but I don't think that's.
Do we have anyone? So basically, I'm gonna just summarize it a little here. The administration wanted the council members to be aware that they are already looking into some of the possibilities of what that would look like, pretty much what Councilmember Spadola just shared with us. So there were a couple of bullets that he had shared. They're meeting with Downtown Visions to learn more about this issue, and have begun staff research to see if other cities have developed a workable resolution. More meetings with Downtown Visions are planned, and the administration will be talking to residents and business owners to get other opinions. And so I think what the administration pretty much wanted us to be aware of, as well as the public, is that they are on it, and they too feel as though that there's an opportunity to see if this is something that we as a city should do. But at the same time, we do know that there are certain communities that are impacted by this than others. And of course, Midtown Brandywine would be one of those communities, because you have about 4 or 5 restaurants like right in the backyard of that community. For those of you that don't know, it would be Washington Street Ale House, it's Tourbirds, it's Mickey Moto's, Darchea's. And so you have all those restaurants right there in the community where you have homeowners that could use those parking spaces. So you have Midtown Brandywine with those particular restaurants, and I believe 40 Acres would be impacted by the Trolley Square restaurants. I heard Councilmember Spadola mention 40 Acres. So you have those two communities that definitely are more impacted by other communities. And I think what we need to try to come up with is something that would work for those communities, and then those communities that, they're not impacted or affected, then there may be, some type of, I like to say win-win. So that's what I wanted to share, because again, the administration did send council a communication and wanted us to be aware that is something that they are working on as well. So, and Councilmember Oliver?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I too have spoken to the administration. I looked at this resolution, and I received a whole nother input on it, as well as talking to some individual downtown businesses, such as the Queens, such as the Grand, who are major has major entertainment coming in the city of Wilmington, and they are totally against ticketing on the weekend and in the evening. Also, you have downtown, if no one has been down there lately, the buildings are empty. I literally walked down there last week. You see 4 or 5 lights on down there. We're not generating any revenue. And to talk about or consider ticketing cars on the weekend, I think it's, I wouldn't be in support of it. I understand some of the impact, but I'm looking at it another way. Some of the restaurants that are coming, we need to generate the revenue. Right now, we're between a rock and a hard place. Ticketing on the weekend downtown, I mean, we just reduced the tickets to $20, and you're talking about ticketing individuals who are coming in town to support downtown businesses. During the daytime, it's nothing going on, so you only have, like I go to Mezzanotti's or No Man's, you only have a little business in the nighttime downtown. That is left is entertainment, and we're talking about, I just think it's bad timing to be ticketing individuals coming into the city who wants to be spending money. To me, I think the only thing we would get out of this is a bunch of people screaming at us. I don't see where we have the extra money to even hire prios when we're half the building is being is retiring or they're working from home. I just would like to know what would we have to gain from this. Another thing, we would just be enforcing downtown enforcement and for just 2 particular areas in the city of Wilmington. I wish I can get some attention in 2 areas in my district, which is police walking. So another thing I like to say is, what was it? The main things, what would we be gaining the city, I mean, what factor would the city get out of this? Because we just reduced the tickets to $20. Now we want to say we want to go and ticket individuals in certain areas because it's a lack of parking. When you go to Philly, I beg the difference, or Baltimore, they vibrant cities, it's hard to find parking. We just don't have the parking around here. We just have another parking lot that they're building homes on, so I mean apartments on. In Philly, you have to walk for blocks and it's nothing you can do about it. So it's between a rock and a hard place here. And I just feel as though right now it sounds good, but just to be ticketing people who really don't have no money, pandemic is still in effect. I don't see the purpose of it, and that's what I have to say. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. Any other council member, Cabrera?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to comment on this as well. It seems like on both sides, I hear it, and I think we need to work towards a compromise, because it's true. You go to any other city in the Northeast and people are, they're racing to those cities, they're traveling, they have an audience. And we don't have that same audience. We're building our downtown now. We're now starting to see the fruits of this labor with more of these restaurants, Deco. I mean, I go by there and I'm like, how does anybody even get their groceries in that building? There's absolutely no parking on that street anymore. Even if you just want to run to the ATM, there's the dangers of double parking. Constantly, I see people double parked in all these areas. But one of the issues that I really see that we need to identify is people aren't using the parking lots that we do have and the parking garages. For example, and I think this is still going on, you could park at the garage at the DoubleTree, and they had an evening fare, which was very low. It was $3 to park after 5 o'clock. So people need to get accustomed to using those garages because they're only half a block away from their venues versus always trying to park on the street. I see the dilemma that we're going to be in with lowering the parking fines and finding this revenue by enforcement on the weekends could be an opportunity, or in the evenings till like maybe 10 p.m. like they do in some cities. But that also comes with the cost of personnel. And we know that our employees, unless we're going to, get a consultant to come in or just farm this out, our prios, they get their salaries and they get their benefits. And when we start adding the cost of benefits, and we do have good benefits for the city, then bringing in that income in the evening, is it going to offset the budget from the loss of the parking fines going down? Is it going to offset the price of enforcement? And not only that, we really have to do a strong marketing campaign because people are programmed. People know that, they don't charge for parking in the evenings, so they're not going to feed the meters. So there's a lot to be discussed. It's not a bad idea, but I think there's got to be some compromise to address both the issues that Councilmember Oliver brought up and the real concerns that Councilman Spadola brought up, because it's true. You go down to those areas, people live there, they come home, they want to be able to park near their home, but instead, you have the folks that are frolicking at our wonderful establishments. I happen to be one of them. I like to go to those establishments, but some of them have taken and made an effort to have parking, like in that area of Torbert's and Mickey Moto's. There's a parking lot there. Sometimes that parking lot is overflowed. So there's a lot to look at, and those are my, my input, my opinion on trying to find maybe a happy medium to address both issues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Council Member Fields, and then Council President Congo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to mention the parking garages myself, but I know that one of the parking lots downtown, they close at 11. I think maybe if we had a conversation with these businesses that stay open past 1 o'clock or whatever, to give their patrons an incentive for parking in the parking lot. Maybe they'll stamp it for them so they don't have to pay for parking. And then if, we here's the thing. We damned if we do, we damned if we don't, okay? Because we're finally building the city of Wilmington up. We're finally getting there.
Right.
If you're not from here, we're finally getting there.
Right.
We had Jake's downtown for years. We had a furniture store downtown for years. We had the Ben's shoe store. Okay,
yeah.
the same cleaners that was down there. We absolutely had nothing downtown but dry goods. Okay, so help you figure this out. So we have to find a medium.
Right.
And in order for us to do that, I do agree. Maybe we do. If it's ticketing, okay. But at the end of the day, let's talk to those business owners to see if we can't come up with an agreement or some kind of incentive for their patrons to park in these different parking lots. Get the ticket, stamp it, and go back. That way you still leave that open space, some of those open spaces for the people that live in those areas. I don't know if you want to take it as a suggestion. It doesn't matter if it go one ear out the other, but that's just how I'm looking at it. We're trying to save face, right? And we're trying to look at the budget, right? If we put more people out in the streets at night, that's something that we have to pay. So we're paying more people to look at parking. However, I have West Center City and the Lower Hilltop that I need money from the administration to help me fix up for economic development and economic growth within my district. But that's just my thought process.
Well,
Thank you, Madam.
Well, thank you. I think all of this is relevant, and all of the comments I think are good because, again, the key word is compromise, and I think Councilmember Spadola is aware of that. And then at the same time, we have to figure it out. We have to at least do some assessing to figure out what we can do. So when we look at what is being proposed here, again, it's about, residents that are being impacted. But I also think, and from what I'm hearing, I just wanted to just chime in with the fact that we are trying to establish Wilmington as a restaurant destination. And so if we're trying to establish Wilmington as a restaurant destination, we also have to figure out, okay, well, where's people going to be parking? So I do think not only with the restaurants, us wanting it to become a restaurant destination, we also have all of these apartment buildings coming up. So parking really is a big issue. And of course, tonight, the resolution is being presented. But the other thing I wanted to say is that if we have the administration that's already working on this, I know that there was a suggestion that we put $80,000 in the budget to do the assessment. And so if Downtown Visions is working on it with the administration, that was one of my suggestions. I think Councilmember Spadola that I had made during the budget when we was on the budget call is that I don't think we need to invest $80,000 to try to figure it out, because we already know what our issues are here, and the administration, they will be major players in that decision in terms of, like, you know, what are some of the opportunities and what are some of the solutions. So I just, you know, that's what the committee meeting is for.
That's right.
Is for us to talk about it, share our thoughts, to share comments as it relates to the topic at hand. I need to go to Councilmember Spadola, then to Councilmember Bracy, and then
Thank
we'll
you.
see.
Yeah, just a couple things, and I agree. If we don't have to spend the money, great. If the staff is able to figure this out, awesome. I think, you know, Councilmember Cabrera and Councilmember Fields were asking the questions that I'm basically trying to get the answers to.
Right.
In the sense that, is it even worth it if we're paying for Prios on the weekend? I don't know. This is not saying let's do it.
Right.
This is saying let's explore the idea that maybe it's good. I don't know if Councilmember Oliver had a misunderstanding about it, but this is not about going downtown and just ticketing everybody. It's about if the people, you know, going to the Grand or spending $100 on a show, spending $50 at Chelsea, I know they have no problem spending $4 or $5 feeding the meter. That's my point.
Right.
I got you.
That's an insignificant cost for a night out. And I'm telling you, me and my wife, we do it all the time. We go downtown. It's like, oh, can't get a spot. Not stopping at Stitch House. So it would help business in that sense if there was more turnover of the spot. So again, this is basically just saying this might be a good idea, might be worth looking into.
Right.
That's, you know, this is not saying let's do it. It's, you know, yeah. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Councilmember Bracy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You sort of addressed what my point was. As someone that lives downtown, all of these apartment buildings, as it stands, people pay to park. So when you think about all of the residents that are moving into the apartment buildings, they are either having to buy, apart from their rent, a monthly membership at one of the local garages, or they have to park on the street. On the weekends, all of the ones that, you know, or many of the ones that live downtown that park in garages, when they go grocery shopping, that means they have to park on the street. So we really have to consider not only the residents in the neighborhoods, but the residents downtown who are already fighting with the patrons of the restaurant to, you know, just to park in front of their apartment building to bring in their groceries or their kids or whatever. So, you know, I hear everyone's point, but there are also thousands of people that are moving downtown or that we're trying to attract to live downtown that are dealing with parking every day. And everyone that lives downtown, they have to pay. So that they're paying that on top of their rent already. And then to have to deal with moving their cars on the weekends, that could be, you know, a deterrent to someone that wants to live in one of the apartment buildings.
Right.
So I just wanted to add that to the comment.
Yes, and it's important because you do live downtown, and that is one of the reasons why I mentioned downtown, because in addition to our neighborhoods, it's not just our traditional neighborhoods. Downtown definitely is another area where parking really has become, and it was already an issue, but it's getting worse now that we're, you know, building up as it relates to all the apartments downtown. Council President.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Was it mentioned earlier that the administration is already doing a study around this? And if so,
Yes.
have they given us a time frame of when they expect to get any?
Based on the email that I read, I think this conversation just started, seems like, in terms of them making us aware that they are on it or they're working on it. So, but I'll let Councilmember Spadola, because I think he's been more in communication with the administration outside of this email that we received today,
Thank you.
to answer that question.
No, so, Council President, the timeline, I reached out to the mayor about it January 15th, said, hey, I think nighttime weekend parking enforcement might be something to consider. He said, yeah, worth considering, certainly worth considering. And then I got the email today that the city has been looking into it, specifically because of concerns raised by the businesses on Downtown Visions that they don't have parking spots for their customers. So, and I agree with Councilmember Bracy, it's total balance. But I think right now we'd all agree the system is not good.
Right, that's a fact. Councilmember Oliver?
Yes, thank you. As a follow-up, and I respect this resolution, but the only reason why I'm saying it, most of the people, such as my cousin who moved down, they are very aware of the parking down there. When they move down there, they know what's going on regarding the parking, because that's one of the questions she said they brought up during her lease, that the parking is horrible down there. We have to remember, most of these people, not all of them, a lot of them are moving from out of town, and they're used to paying for parking. As Councilman Bracy said, they are very aware that when you move in these apartments, parking comes with it, you have to pay for it, et cetera. Only thing I was looking at, I think was a good idea for certain areas, but just talking to individual businesses, because I eat downtown and I stay downtown a lot. They were, like you said, just a suggestion though, so I'm not saying I'm totally against it. It just seemed like it needs to be more of a conversation. But the individuals, and I want to say this, we can't have it both ways. We're voting for to add apartments downtown, but then we're saying we want to penalize the people who's moving down there. We're voting to say put some more apartments down there, and now we're sitting up here saying we want to ticket people. So that's what my mindset is. I don't want somebody to come back and say, well, you approved to get more apartments down there. Now you're telling me, now you want me to get ticketed. So to me, it's just a sticky situation. I think we, have more of a conversation.
Absolutely.
With the administration and the downtown
Vision.
businesses,
Yeah.
So I just, I appreciate the people who's doing the valet parking. So we're very aware, we're not annexed, so it's nowhere. So we have to watch, voting on adding apartments down there. If we're gonna say it's nowhere to park, and then we're gonna penalize them, that's where I was.
Yeah, it definitely is a bigger conversation that we need to continue. And thank you. I do see Chief of Staff Washington has something to say.
Yes, and I appreciate the robust conversation around this issue. I will say that we are in discussions with Downtown Visions, the residents, and the merchants. However, this is a much broader discussion because obviously we have to consider resources when we talk about things of this nature. And the PREOs, as you know, are union employees. And this is very well will have to renegotiate their contract on changing their shift. So it's a much broader discussion. It's a significant cost on top of the fact that we're going to be losing revenue for reducing the ticket fees. So I just wanted to make note of that.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for your comment. Councilmember Spadola, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I just appreciate everyone's comments, and yes, it's definitely an ongoing conversation, just something worth looking into. Definitely not a slam dunk by any means, but I'm glad there's a lot of smart people in support and working on it.
All right. Any council members on the line before we go to the public? Do we have anyone from the public? Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Councilmember Spadola, for sharing. Okay. And
I'm sorry.
Oh.
No.
hold on. Let's see.
I'm sorry. Public. Judith Jones.
Okay.
Okay.
Please.
Real quick.
Okay.
I will be very
Sure.
quick. I live in Midtown Brandywine, but I spent most of my career as a State Department Foreign Service diplomat, so I'm good at compromises. It looks to me like if we could just take the PREOs and shift some of their time so that they were actually enforcing parking that's already signposted for 5 or 6 o'clock. Try it out. Try out some ideas like selling visitor passes to residents in Midtown Brandywine or other places. If they have guests coming, that they have, 10 passes for $50. they can have one of those with dates penciled in so that their visitor can park 2 days there. It could be both money, it could be an inclusive element, and it doesn't have to be till 10 o'clock, as I say, 5, 6 o'clock, which is already posted. I'd really written the word compromise before Councillor Cabrera brought it up, and I very much have appreciated the discussion. I think you guys are on the right track. Go after it, though. But it's horrible. I'm a retired person. I don't go out in the evening, but the young people who want to and come back, it isn't that they can't park close to home. They can't park in this 3-block area at all. It just gets totally filled up. Anyway, thanks a lot.
Well, thank you for your comment. Thank you very much, and especially being a resident of one of the communities that's being impacted, so thank you. Okay, so real quick, we have 2 more items. Now, do we have to have a quorum? Michelle, we're good? Okay, all right. So we're going to move right into our update on ARPA funds.
Good evening, Councilwoman Harley.
Hi.
Stephanie Merck. I will be giving the ARPA presentation.
Okay.
Alrighty. WITN, would you mind pulling up the slides?
Stephanie, are you going to be giving an update on the FY 2020 second quarter expenditure report?
Oh, no, I'm doing the ARPA report.
Okay.
There should be somebody from OMB to do the expenditure.
I'm sorry, actually, no, I did inform Michelle that the person that was supposed to give the presentation is out sick today.
Okay.
So if you have any questions or concerns, you can just send them to the mayor's office and I'll make sure that he gets back to you.
Okay, so while we're waiting for WITN to bring up the information for ARPA, I just want to say for the record that item number 3, the FY 2022 second quarter expenditure, report overview per city code by the Office of Management and Budget. The presenter is not here tonight. However, if anyone has any questions as it relates to that topic, that you can send an email to our Chief of Staff, Tanya Washington. And so that's how we will address that item on tonight. Our last item will be the update on the ARPA funds, and it is now up on the screen. So thank you.
Wonderful. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a summary of categories showing the allocation for each. We start with a total of $55 million. So far, we have allocated $48.4 million, and we have about $7 million left unallocated. Next slide, please. This is a slide highlighting new projects. As you can see, there's about $400,000 worth of new projects. Each of these are highlighted in the individual category slides, so I'll go over them as we go along. Next slide.
I'm sorry, Stephanie, can you
Sure.
can you share the names of those new projects that got started?
Certainly.
Yeah.
I was planning to give an overview of each of the projects underneath each of the categories, but I'm happy to give now if you would prefer.
Let me ask you a question. I guess I can get a copy of that because the evening has been long. I'll get a copy of it from our office, so you can keep going. You can keep going.
Okay. The next slide, please. Okay, and administrative costs, we start with a budget of 1.8 million, and we have allocated that full amount. There are no new projects this month. Next slide, please. All right, in building safer communities, we have an overall budget of $8 million. We have allocated about 3 million of that and have about 5 million left unallocated. We have one new project, which is Apricot 360 case management software that will be used for data analysis in the Community Public Safety Initiative. Next slide, please. All right, in community investment, we start with a budget of 4.85 million. We have allocated about 4.7 million and have about $185,000 left unallocated. There are 3 new projects in this category, one Apex Lounge, St. Patrick's Center, and Go Make a Difference Corporation. Next slide, please. In neighborhood revitalization, we start with a budget of 22 million. All of those funds have been allocated. We have one new project for this month, which is Central Baptist CDC. Those funds will be used for architectural and engineering services for affordable housing projects. Next slide, please. And in workforce development, we have an overall budget $4 million. We have allocated about 2.3 million, and we have about 1.7 left remaining. A new project this month is Hilltop Lutheran Neighborhood Center, which will use the funds for a forklift simulator program. Final slide is, of course, our revenue replacement, which remains at 12 million, and our essential pay for essential workers, which remains at about 2.7 million. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, I see Marshall Bass Knight. You have a question?
Yes, for the, I had a question. It's not highlighted as anything new, but under the Building Safer Communities for the East Side Neighborhood Camera Initiative for the 1.2 million,
Yes.
Are those cameras going to be tied into the cameras that that police oversees? Is it going to be tied into those, or is this going to be a separate, just neighborhood cameras that's not linked into that system?
Do you want me to answer it? I'm sorry. That's, if we're talking about the camera system for the Upper East Side, it's tied into WPD system.
Okay, so.
It's actually they're managing the project.
Okay, so this here went through like the camera working group?
Yes.
Okay, so, okay, I'll talk to you off the record. All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilmember White?
Councilmember White speaking. Regarding the monies that have not been spent, although allocated, aren't these funds time sensitive?
Yes.
And
All funds need to be under contract by 2024, and then all funds need to be completely spent by the end of 2026.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
to me, it would be helpful if that delineation is noted in this report, since it would be probably an indication of whether some of these dollars are going to be actually spent by the entities that we've allocated.
Sure. So the when it says project balance, that is the amount left that is unspent. So there is the amount that shows for each project is the amount that has actually gone out the door.
Yep.
But I can add a total at the bottom that shows the total amount left unspent.
No, that's not what I'm speaking about. These are time-sensitive dollars. As you said, they've got to be totally spent by 2024, I believe. At some point, would the administration know whether a given project would have the time to complete said project initiative by that time? And if not, what would be the administration's proposal to move those funds rather than return them?
Yeah, so we consistently monitor spend down with our compliance partners, UHY advisors. And so as we get closer to the deadline to ensure that all funds are under contract, we are monitoring, especially in some of the the categories that may take a little bit longer to spend down on. We are monitoring and putting a plan in place to ensure that they are reallocated if necessary.
Okay. And I'm going to say this one last time, Madam Chair.
Sure.
There are certain projects, such as construction projects, and we know that there has been supply issues, and I have full trust and confidence in the administration. My question is simply, for those projects that are construction projects, new, especially new, is there a plan to monitor those projects to make certain that those dollars are spent and that the city doesn't have to return them?
Yes, we are monitoring them with our contractor UHY advisors, and as well as our, if you go to the first slide, we have a construction project manager
Okay.
who is monitoring the actual construction work.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
Thanks for those answers. Appreciate it.
Okay, Stephanie, does that wrap up your presentation?
Yes, it does.
Okay, well, thank you for that update on tonight. And as I said, I will get my information that I was asking about. I'll get that later. So thank you again. And before we close out, I need to ask, is there anyone from the public that has a question, or are there any council members on the line that have a question? So let me go to the council members first. Any council members? Okay, anyone from the public? And there's no one here in the committee room. So having said that, I'm going to take a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. So move. Second. Have a good night, everyone.